All right, folks, we are back here with Jim Bazzani from Caleb and Brown. Really excited to touch base with you, Jim. There's been a lot taking place in these markets. I know that I've been making sure that I got all of my platforms ready to go, getting ready for this next alt season, XRP leading the way. Very excited to have you back here today, Jim. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me on and excited to chat.
So since we last spoke, which the time has been flying, I think it was like the end of 2024. So it's, been a busy 2025 so far here. I wanted to touch base though on the acquisition made by SwiftX of your company, Caleb and Brown. From my understanding, it's pretty much business as usual, but how has that acquisition gone through?
Yeah, it's been pretty seamless. As you mentioned, nothing has really changed here. The purpose of the acquisition was very much a growth play on their end. The SwiftX, for anyone that isn't aware, is the largest Australian exchange, but they don't have any presence within the US and they don't have the relevant licenses or any clients. So they love the service we provide. They know that a lot of what we do is help servicing US clients and expanding our reach within the US market. So it's very much a bold play on their end to quickly enter into the US market, double down on the personalized brokerage service that we offer, which is distinct and unique from most exchanges. So in terms of internally and how we do things here, it's been very much the same. We just have that added layer of support, a bit more funding behind us to expand and scale quicker into the US market.
Yeah, speaking of the U.S. market, it has been brought to my attention that you guys now have an office down there in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Can you give us the update on the U.S. office and the U.S. Caleb and Brown entity the U.S. clients can now be under?
Yeah. It's it was something that we were doing even before the acquisition went live, and I can formally announce that we actually have now US office set up in Fort Lauderdale. So a key part of our brokerage team that very much we're key in developing our service here have moved over to the US and they've formulated that office. But something I want to stress as well is, yes, we're an Australian entity, but we have a US LLC and have had so for a long period of time. So if you are a US investor, you, in most instances, will fall under that US LLC. If you are living in the Florida area and would like to work with our brokerage team there, that's always an option. But it's something that we're not going to just stop with in Florida. We have plans for the West Coast and other parts of the US, and just speaks towards our focus and intention on the US market. As I mentioned, Australian business, but anywhere from 70 to 80% of our client base is US based. So we're really a US business. But we know that our clients want that face-to-face interaction. They want to speak to their broker in person. And so it's the start of something really special in terms of having more of a face-to-face presence in the US.
Yeah. And as from an outsider's perspective, what can you say to just the shift in regulatory environment here in the United States? I mean, we've been enjoying it, obviously, in the XRP community. XRP's been performing very well, but just an outsider looking in, what do you make of the shift here in the United States?
Oh, I am an outsider in the sense that I don't live in the US, but we very much follow it day to day. And I think it's incredibly bullish. We were quite excited when this new administration came in because they seemed very pro-crypto and crypto-centric, but they've really put their money where their mouth is in terms of the Genius Act, the Clarity Act, the 401k legislation or executive order, Project Crypto with Paul Atkins. There are so many developments within the last 6 months that we've probably had since sort of the last 4 or 5 years in crypto. It's very bullish on certain sectors like stable coins, like the DeFi sector. But I think what it means is that there's more institutional inflow and attention simply because now there's more support at a government level. It wasn't too long ago that we had the government start to build out that executive order for a Bitcoin strategic reserve. I think we'll start to see that flow into all states, hopefully at some point. And outside of just Bitcoin, hopefully we'll get XRP, Ethereum. So I think ultimately we've seen so much progression in the last 6 months, and it's really going to cause quite significant headwinds, hopefully, for some market performance at the end of the year.
Yeah. And I just want to say, as an American, I want you to consider that the Trump sons are off doing a couple deals, but just remember what President Trump tweeted about XRP being in that strategic stockpile. So I'm still hanging on to that tweet from our president, and we'll see how that plays out. But no, we're very excited to see the shift, not just for XRP, but for the broader industry, and just sitting down and getting a real deal done. We we could spend a whole hour talking about the problems that we face in the United States, but we'll save that for a different podcast. Jim, the shift has been amazing, but we're still up against a couple states that are kind of a pain in the butt to deal with, just to put it out simply. So New York, Canada, UK. This is the only complaint that I get about Caleb and Brown, is that you're not available in these jurisdictions. Everybody loves your service, and a lot of people are anxious to get coverage there in New York and those other two jurisdictions that I mentioned. Any plans, any tailwinds there in that direction?
Yeah, it's something that I get messaged about all the time as well. So it's not something that is falling on deaf ears. Obviously, we want to service those markets, and for the UK and Canadian market, like we used to have an office within London, but the regulatory environment has changed there, and they're all have sort of their separate reasons. But ultimately, it's a very much a wait and see approach, and something that we're monitoring closely. New York, as an example, it requires a digital asset business to have a BIT license. Incredibly difficult to get, expensive, takes over 3 years. Very few businesses have it. So it makes it really difficult to operate in that state. Now, I'm hopeful that, that new mayor is talking about wanting to become more of a crypto capital and hub again. So I'm pretty bullish, like we've seen now at a government level, that these regulations and these stances on crypto will evolve over time, and will make it easier for businesses like us to operate in a market like New York. So I want to stress, if you are a New York resident, a Canadian resident, or a UK resident, it's not because we don't like you, we don't want to service you. If anything, it'd be a great business decision on our end. It's just very much due to the regulatory environment. That's the same within the UK market. So they had recent laws that made it more difficult to market and promote digital assets there. Now, speaking towards the Canadian market, that's got to do with more sort of banking rails as well. So there's always reasons as to why we can't always offer our services, but it's ultimately not something that's final. I do think it will change over time. We'll be able to offer our services again in those states, just naturally by the way in which we operate, in that every single client gets their own broker. It's a personalized, dedicated service. It's quite resource intensive. So we need to be 100% certain on the jurisdictions that we're operating in that we can do so sufficiently, so our clients get the best service possible.
And you mentioned 401ks. Any potential 401k offerings or products from your guys' company in the future, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that that executive order got passed will make things a lot easier on our end. Ultimately, at this stage, we do allow clients to onboard their LLCs with us, or trusts, or operate as an individual. 401ks are something that we were hopeful we'll be able to offer now in the future once the relevant legislation, well, hopefully that legislation gets passed. I know it's just an executive order, but we certainly think that in the future, that will be something that we can offer. And if for whatever reason there is an Australian, I'm sure you have some Australian viewers on the line, you can invest through us through SMSF. So that's our equivalent of 401ks. That is doable, but we're hopeful that will be available for US clients at some point soon.
Awesome. Now, I want to get into your guys' level of security, which I think is, once again, back to the standard provided by Fireblocks. This has been incredible to see, because your level of service is unmatched from what I've seen, from what I've heard from our community, and from what I've experienced myself. It is unmatched. But then we move over to the security side, right? And you're providing free institutional grade custody for everybody, no matter the size of their portfolio. Can we talk? I want to run everybody through again your institutional grade custody solution from Fireblocks and that partnership you have with them.
Yeah, so we've been working with Fireblocks now for probably the best part of 4 years. They are a top grade custody solution. I know that there have been some conjecture in the market currently around whether they're institutional grade. All the largest institutions, the biggest banks, use them around the world. But we developed a Fireblocks, a custody solution through Fireblocks, but it's ultimately up to the business that uses that solution what kind of security checks, what kind of authorization policies you have in place to actually protect assets. So with us, as you mentioned, we offer our custody solution free of charge for clients. And what that ultimately means is if you decide to custody with Caleb Brown, those assets are stored in cold storage. Everything's accounted for one, so it's readily available and withdrawable whenever you need. We are quite risk off in how we operate as a business. We just custody assets and keep them there. We aren't lending them out elsewhere. We aren't loaning out your assets or trying to earn a yield elsewhere. We just store them for you in cold storage, and they don't move until you decide to make a trade or withdraw those assets. So for a lot of clients, that gives them really strong peace of mind. Not a lot of us necessarily want to custody their assets themselves. There's a lot of risk associated with that, especially if you're custodying $500,000 or $1 million, you essentially become your own bank. So it's something that we offer free of charge with no custody fees, but it's certainly no requirement. In fact, we encourage clients to use their own hardware wallet where they're comfortable and confident in doing so. But this is just a custody solution that we offer for those that don't necessarily want to do that, or they want the added benefit of cold storage, but the added benefit of accessibility, which, I use my own hardware wallet. I have a portion with Calvin Brown, but I've certainly had times where I've been overseas and the market's moved and I haven't been able to do anything because my hardware wallet's back in Australia. So this is you get the benefit of both. And it's through our partnership with Fireblocks and everything we do with them.
Right. Now, when it comes to assets on your platform, that's kind of in partnership with Fireblocks too. So can you tell us the process of bringing on new assets and maybe potential, I don't know, you probably can't mention any that might be in the works, but could you give us an idea of some of our other favorite assets that we'd like to see on your platform? I know that I've mentioned a few to you. Any plans or any headways, any progress there?
Yeah, so a lot of the reason why we wouldn't necessarily be able to list an asset is either, as you mentioned, we don't have a relevant or sufficient custody solution to be able to offer that for clients to adequately custody it for them. That's a big component. We would limit our counterparty risk in all instances for clients. So we don't want to hold large numbers of volume of an asset if we can't custody it safely for clients. So that's the first thing. The second is really just around liquidity. So we have a whole range of liquidity providers that we use to facilitate trades for clients to ensure that they can enter and exit at whatever size they want with us. Ultimately, some assets are far harder for us to source liquidity for than others. And I would say they're the two main reasons, outside of a whole range of other considerations that our operations team review daily. I don't know what assets you're necessarily referring to, but a Stronghold is one that I get asked about all the time. Again, that is one that we're constantly monitoring, both from a custody perspective, but more importantly, more so from a liquidity avenue. We never want to offer an asset for clients and then we can't sufficiently sell that in the market for them. So it's something that we review daily. If you are a client or you're a listener of Zach and you have an asset that you'd like us to list, we'll never say no to going through that process of seeing whether we can list it. But we always monitor that moving forward. So, an example of one we listed just recently, World Liberty Financial, obviously that has tons of liquidity in the market. We can sufficiently custody it. So we listed it quite quickly after doing our legal review of it. Now, is that an asset everyone wants to hold long-term compared to some of the others? Who knows? Maybe not. But that just speaks towards how quickly things can move for us in terms of how quickly we can list something. Yeah. So it's a wait and see for certain assets like Stronghold.
Great. And I just want everybody to note that you are constantly listening to your customer feedback and you're hearing our, clients say that, hey, we want these assets. And when they're made available, safely and securely with plenty of liquidity, you guys are going to do that. And this is what I've appreciated because we talked about XRP Ledger tokens, getting some of that integration down the road, between last time we spoke and now. We have XRP Ledger tokens now on Dex Screener. Chainalysis just noted that they're going to be helping and integrating with all of the XRP Ledger there. So this process has begun. One more thing that on your platform that I want folks to realize here, you mentioned that you're not involved in any lending or borrowing or leverage with your platform. Now, our audience understands very well that we're going through a debt, currency, and liquidity crisis. We talk about this all the time. And so right now, making sure that you have sufficient liquidity, and if something does happen, making sure that your assets are bankruptcy remote, have bankruptcy remote protection. Somebody asked about that too. So can you just reiterate how your platform's a little bit more safe maybe than some of these platforms that are out offering 500x leverage to a bunch of degenerates? Welcome to the crypto space, right? Versus your platform, which is just simply doing spot trading with that bankruptcy remote protection as well, too.
Yeah, it's a great point. We know that yield generation is something that we're all interested in. I've personally, in the past, hunted yields to my dismay. Often at times we've seen, especially in 2021, we saw Celsius, BlockFi, a number of these protocols offer yields. And what you don't realize is that, wow, I'm getting these amazing APYs, but on the back end, my assets are actually at quite significant risk. And that's something that we always encourage for even our clients that want to chase yield elsewhere. Do so, but understand the risks associated, whether it's counterparty risk, as you mentioned. If it's an asset like XRP that you're being offered yields on, well, it's a non-native staking asset. So it means that they're probably loaning out your assets elsewhere to earn a yield, or they're using something like the Flare network to wrap that XRP into Flare and earn yield that way. But that has smart contract risk associated with it as well. So nothing's ever free in this world. If you are going to be offered a yield, there is some sort of risk associated with it. And then it's really up to the client whether their risk profile associates having that underlying asset become at risk to earn that yield or not. And so as a business, as you mentioned, we've very much operated on a risk-off approach. So we just provide spot trading. We aren't exposing client assets to any counterparty risk or any other risk out there. So ultimately, it's up to the client and their risk profile. I would just ensure that you're doing your due diligence. The XRP ledger and all the DeFi capabilities on the AMM are becoming very exciting. It's still relatively new and nascent. So it's important that clients do understand that if you are going to try and earn a yield somewhere, that there are risks associated with that. In terms of how we custody assets into, as you mentioned, bankruptcy remote, again, some sort of misconception around our service, but I want to make this very clear for clients. If you're holding your assets with Calvin Brown, you are the beneficial owner of those assets. We hold those client assets on trust. But what that ultimately means is that they don't form part of the entity's assets. So if something was to happen to Calvin Brown, or if we went bankrupt, which is incredibly unlikely given our balance sheet, but also the recent acquisition, let's just say in that hypothetical world that happens, the first thing that we would be required to do as a business is return all client assets back to their rightful owners. They don't form part of the estate of the business because we're not the beneficial owners of them, our clients are. So I wanted to make that clear. And that is something that, again, I've been burned in the past with FTX. I held assets on FTX. If you read the fine print of their terms of business, you would have actually learned that they became the owner of your assets. And that's why I was put through a creditor claim process that took years to get done. We always stress for our clients that if you're going to custody not yourself, you're going to do it through a Calvin Brown or elsewhere, do your research in terms of, are you still the beneficial owner of those assets? What happens to them if something happens to the underlying custodian? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk to you about this trend that we've been seeing where XRP in particular, along with other assets too, but really there's been a trend in XRP lately. In the XRP community, we're always a little wary of trusting different parties, right? And, you know, in regards to the yield, it's been a frustration of mine. A lot of people coming in offering yield on XRP, but not really explaining simply how they're generating that yield. You know, is it going to be sustainable? Are assets secure? But furthermore, we've seen a trend here of folks taking assets and XRP off the exchanges. I can tell you that I've been doing this. I've been telling my audience that I, you know, in combination with self-custody, and then I've been moving XRP to your platform along with other assets as well too. Because, you know, I'm looking to make some trades here this bull run, and then maybe, God willing, cash out a little bit, you know, from our trading. And so we'll see if that happens. But can you speak to the trend that we've seen here? And I think that it comes back to folks are worried about this liquidity risk. What happens if, you know, the platform goes under? And so moving to platforms like yours and moving to self-custody has been my solution. But what can you say to this trend that we've noticed recently?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think
just a data point too, Jim, sorry. Almost 300 million XRP drained off of Coinbase in the last 30 days. So I don't know if people have a particular issue with Coinbase, or I've also put, you know, a little bit of speculation out there that maybe institutions are picking up some bags of XRP before the ETFs go live. But that's a data point here that we're referring to.
I think that's a pretty fair speculation in terms of the ETF point. I know if you go on Polymarket, the probability of an XRP ETF being announced is pretty high. So that could be one reason. I personally think the biggest thing is that investors are becoming more sophisticated, especially when it comes to what we've seen in previous cycles when it comes to liquidity, ease of access of funds, being able to do what you want with your funds as well. I've experienced this back in 2021, even remembered it back in 17 and 18, where a lot of exchanges and the platforms will limit you in terms of how much you can transfer off their platform. They may even limit you in terms of how much you could sell in that scenario where you mentioned around profit taking. So I think it's just a natural trend that the XRP community is becoming more aware of these limitations. They'd rather, as you mentioned, custody it themselves and have that freedom to do with what they want with those assets, or they don't want to necessarily handle the risks of that, but want to use a platform like Caleb Brown, a service like ours, where they can always access their assets. They can do trades when they please. They can off-ramp seamlessly, as you mentioned. So I think there's a sophistication level, because unfortunately we've seen it in previous bull runs where platforms go down, there's downtime, they have liquidity constraints because they're a market maker, and all of a sudden all this XRP is being taken out of that liquidity pool. So I think there's a level of sophistication, which is great to see. Exchanges play a really important role in this ecosystem, but I think we've seen it time and time again that you can't necessarily trust them when there's periods of peak high demand. And I feel like we haven't really gotten there yet. It doesn't feel like we've had those levels of 2021. So maybe there are a large portion of the ecosystem that's anticipating that in the future.
Well, it's going to get exciting. I want to get your thoughts on just how bullish you are. One final question, though, which is you mentioned the entities. So we can use LLCs, trusts through your platform. Can you explain that for our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So with Caleb Brown, you can create either an individual account, or you can also create an individual account and then onboard an LLC or a trust and trade and operate through that entity. And that's something that most of our clients take advantage of. So I would say anywhere from 50% plus of our clients have an entity account associated to their individual account for tax reasons, for ease of investment, whatever works for them. I know I can speak from my personal experience. So I have an individual account with Caleb Brown. That's where I'm a bit riskier, have a few more DGen plays on that account, but I also have a family trust account set up. So I've onboarded my family trust and I invest in more safe, longer term assets on their behalf as the beneficiaries of that trust. But they're two separate accounts within the same login. So it just gives you that flexibility to operate in different manners. Certainly some of the stuff I'm investing on the individual capacity probably isn't suitable for the family trust. So it just gives you that optionality if that's how you want to invest with Caleb Brown.
You mean to tell me, Jim, that you're not betting the family farm on Mickey Mouse meme coins?
No, I think that would be a little too irresponsible. My personal network maybe, but not the family trust.
And speaking of getting bullish, how bullish are you on Q4 2025? There's so much coming together with ETFs, digital asset treasury companies, the Clarity Act. Ripple is going to become an OCC chartered bank. How bullish are you on this space here to finish off the year?
Yeah, I do think we have another leg to run up here. It has been relatively sideways sort of the last 2 or 3 weeks. Part of that is a bit of hesitancy around the macroeconomic factors. I do think we'll get an interest rate cut next week, which will ease liquidity conditions, provide more inflows into the market. But as you mentioned, there is so much happening in this space, not only from a crypto ecosystem, but even just XRP and Ripple Labs. They're incredibly active. There's tons of acquisitions in this space. So I ultimately think we are very much looking forward to a strong Q4 and maybe even flow into Q1 2026. I think there is a leg up. And as you said, this is a different bull cycle. There's so much more institutional adoption in this one where large institutions, treasury companies are appearing now that just want to hold the asset as a sole business function. I think we're going to start to see maybe not so much volatility on the downward cycle because we have those large institutions holding those assets. So I am very bullish. It is very much dependent on what happens in the overall economy. But I do think we have another leg up here in us.
And did I hear you say that the bear market's canceled? Is that what you just said, Jim?
I would hope so. I do think there's an element of now that institutions hold these assets and they have certain lockup requirements, or they have their whole mantra of their business, like say MicroStrategy is to hold Bitcoin, or Tom Lee's to hold ETH. I do think the downward trajectory probably won't be significant. I do unfortunately think we will go into another bear market, but I don't know how impactful it will be compared to previous bear markets.
Right. Yeah. And I'm seeing the same thing as well. Can you just speak as we wrap up this session, Jim, to what it's like dealing with the XRP family and just how vital and important the XRP community has been to Caleb and Brown too? It seems like our relationship has grown very strong over this past year.
It's significant. And I very much felt that personally at XRP Vegas. The amount of clients that I met there, the amount of partners like yourself that we met as well that had really positive things to say about Caleb Brown, but Also had a lot of recommendations around how we can improve our product is amazing. We very much are a personalized service, but we're focused on building long-term relationships. And certainly the XRP community has been one that has been with us for a number of years now. We've always had great feedback from them, always been able to enter and exit the market with their XRP when they need. But it's been a really fruitful one, and we're very privileged to have really great communities like yourself that we work with every single day. I know that I can speak to the brokers that, every single day we're speaking to clients about the XRP ecosystem, how bullish we are, and making sure that clients are as educated as possible around all the things that are happening. Because as I mentioned, look, you got to tip your hat to Ripple Labs as a business. They are incredibly active when it comes to acquisitions. What they're doing in the stablecoin space right now is very interesting. So there's always interesting developments occurring that we're making sure that our clients are as educated as possible, outside of obviously following yourself and staying up to date with everything along the way. So we're incredibly thankful. We can't wait to continue to see this space evolve and expand. And we've seen so many clients have great financial results with us. One thing about the XRP community is that they're always a little tricky when it comes to taking profits. I've been there myself.
None of us are going to sell,
my
Jim.
Assets.
We're just not going to sell this Bullrun, okay?
It doesn't seem that way, and that's fine. Like, that's your choice as an investor. But certainly, we're very excited and to see where this space evolves with the XRP community moving forward.
And can you just speak real quick about how you guys capture liquidity for those who do want to sell? This bull run's going to get exciting. I've been warning and sounding the alarm about order books thinning out, liquidity getting tied up at the top, and it's going to come and go very quickly. And I'll tell you right now, Jim, last week I went through my entire portfolio and I set sell orders on every single asset that I have. Obviously, I'm not selling much of my XRP, a little bit, but I went through every single platform, and on different, I'm not going to name any names, but on some of these other platforms, they cannot tell me what the fee is going to be, what the final execution price is going to be. They just say, we'll let you know at the time of execution, if it ever does go through. And I've just been pleasantly surprised setting orders on your platform, watching them execute, asking, hey, can you send it to the bank account? It arrives the next day. So can you just speak real quick in closing on how you guys source such great liquidity for your clients?
Yeah, it really does speak to our time in market. And I would say that's one of the key selling points for anyone that maybe has hesitancy about working with us. We've been around since 2016, which is a really long time in the crypto space. And so we've had periods of time of peak demand where we've been operationally mature and really refined how we source liquidity, how we do everything internally to get the best result for clients. So we have really strong partnerships with a whole bunch of OTC desks, liquidity providers. Even at some points we'll use a DEX or centralized exchanges to get the best liquidity possible for clients. And that's something we've been able to do through really peak periods of demand in 2021, even in 2017 as well. And that will continue throughout this cycle. As I mentioned, we have a lot of customer-facing employees in this business, the brokerage side, but far more of our business is on the back end. We have a really strong operations team. We have a compliance and legal team. So we're constantly always working with our liquidity providers to ensure that we always have sufficient liquidity. We aren't a market maker, which means we aren't exposed to one single point of liquidity, which I think is a really important feature for most people to understand. And then the other element that you mentioned around transparency of fees, it is really important, at least for me, and I know for most investors, that you actually understand how much you're being charged for a transaction or a trade. Now, we do charge 3.5%. Some people think that's a lot higher than most other platforms. We understand that. The big thing to be aware of is that a lot of these other platforms will charge you those hidden costs, especially around spreads. And in periods of peak demand, they'll charge dynamic spreads, which widens as there's more demand. Often at times when you look at those spreads, you won't realize them unless you're actually buying and selling at the same point. A lot of the time, those spreads are a lot larger than the 3.5% that we charge. And the best way to think about it is, yes, it's a transaction fee, but it's all encompassing of the entire service. You get a dedicated broker who's an expert to help you with your portfolio, to help you set up things like, as you mentioned, profit-taking strategies. You get the custody that's free of charge. There's no withdrawal fees or limits that unfortunately you'll experience on other platforms. So it's all encompassing of a whole range of services that you get in one. And it's something that a lot of our clients are happy to pay because they're thankful of the entire service. So we are all about transparency here. That's how we do things. And I think most clients appreciate that because in crypto, it's usually the exact opposite.
Yeah. And I can just tell our audience, you know, I tested this out earlier this year. I sold a bag of XRP on 3 different platforms, right? And the only platform that could tell me what the fee was going to be and what would end up, you know, in my US dollar account when the transaction was done was yours. These other platforms hit me on that hidden spread. And then they also hit me on the withdrawal fee when I went to cash it out to my bank account, unlike your guys' platform. And so as I was going through yesterday, finalizing my exit targets and setting my sell orders up on, you know, other platforms here, I don't even know if the order is going to execute. If it does, I don't know what my fees will be. And I don't know how much money will end up in my US dollar account at the end of it. And then if I do decide to withdraw, it's another fee on top of that. And then I'm going to run into my limits too, if this actually ends up all playing out. Versus my experience on your platform, it's all transparent, it's all upfront, and it's executed flawlessly and arrived in my bank account the next day without issue. So I can just say personally, and the feedback that I've heard from our community has been amazing. This is why I wanted to have you back on the show, Jim. A lot's been taking place in the market, and I think that you guys do a great job of actually educating your clientele as well. So I just want to say thank you for being involved, not just in the XRP community, but helping people with their broader crypto strategy. Would love to have you or Jake or another person from Caleb and Brown back on soon again too. I know you guys are moving quickly over there. So thanks again. And Jim, is there anything in closing that we should know before we sign off?
No, I mean, thanks for having me back on, Zach. The key thing I would say is if you haven't used Caleb and Brown services, you're not sure if the service is right for you, it's completely free to make an account, speak to a broker, and just get an understanding of everything that we do here. And I very much encourage you to do so. It's just great to have optionality when it comes to being able to off-ramp as well. Like, I think it's a great point. And I would very much encourage anyone that's listening to this to at least go through the process of a test withdrawal. See if you can actually withdraw your crypto earnings into USD and then into your bank account, because you want to be able to do that before everything goes crazy, and see what the limits or fees may be. As Zach mentioned, there will be none on our end. So I very much encourage, if you're not quite sure, you're hesitant, try the service. It's completely free, and see if it's right for you. But thanks again for having me on, Zach. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to hopping on again in the future.
Yeah, I'll tell folks, you will be shocked when you actually go through that process. And it's important to note, like you said, it's free to set up these accounts. Nobody else is offering free institutional grade custody to anybody. And most, of these institutions aren't providing that level of custody unless you have over 500,000 or 1 million in crypto assets. The other thing that's important, as a retail trader, you're not getting access to OTC trading desks. Through Caleb and Brown, you are. So you're getting access to liquidity that nobody else is really providing. You're getting institutional grade custody for free that nobody else is providing. And I can also confirm that you're getting a level of customer service that nobody else is providing. So thank you, Jim, for helping service our community. We really appreciate you. We'll get you back soon. Hopefully we'll see you here stateside. And I definitely need to make it across the Pacific down there to visit you in the land down under. Looking forward to that. And thanks again, Jim.
Thanks, Zach.
All right. Take care. I am your host, Zach Rector. I really appreciate all of the love and support. If you want to support the channel, just remember that you can start by smashing that thumbs up for me, sharing this content far and wide, and everything else is at my website.